Well, thanks everybody for joining today. We're going to be obviously talking about surveillance tech, all the technology that law enforcement uses, that prosecutors use, even private corporations use that feed into law enforcement that are impacting communities. We're going to talk about how people are organizing to resist them, what are some of the legislative steps people can take, and how you can think about approaching what sometimes seems like an off-putting issue, right? Like, I don't do technology, I don't understand these things, I don't know how to go about this. And so, what we have today is a phenomenal panel that I am just way geeked about, super excited, folks who have sort of worked this on every level in terms of looking at this. And so I'm going to give you brief bios and then we're going to jump into the conversation. I'm going to be posing some questions to the panel. They're going to have a little conversation with each other, and then we're going to open to questions with all of you. Please put questions. Are we using, I think we're using Q&A, Tamara, if I am correct. So please put questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. It makes it very easy for us to track and then be able to try to answer some of them. I will pose the questions out loud to the panel and we'll see how many we can get answered before we wrap it up. But with all that said, I'm going to do the quick introductions and then start asking people questions. So today we're going to hear from Sarah Whittington with the ACLU of Louisiana. Sarah's been working locally on pushing back at the city council who's trying to expand the use of face recognition in the city. We're also going to hear from Edith Romero. Works with, look at me, I'm already tripping on my words, with Eyes on Surveillance in New Orleans, because obviously this is not the only technology that's ever shown up there, and working to pull together a community response to the type of tech that law enforcement is bringing. And then we're going to talk to Celinda Guerrero, who is part of the National ShotSpotter Coalition. ShotSpotter being a technology that alleges it can identify gunshots and tell the police where to go. And Celinda's work with the ShotSpotter Coalition is integrated into on-the-ground work, doing abolition work. And then we're going to wrap with Dev in Washington. Dev is in Philly, where they are with the People's Tech Project, where they are working with a broad coalition of Philadelphia groups to push back on the use of tech that's negatively impacting the lives of Philly citizens. So that's what we have for you today. And I'm going to jump right in with a question for Sarah. So, Sarah, we pulled you into this because recently New Orleans, like always, was just doing the most when it came to law enforcement technology, right? They had actually an ordinance from the city council that was very clear that they were not to use real-time face recognition tracking. So, of course, what they did was use real-time face recognition tracking. And when that was discovered, there was efforts to, instead of say, what are y'all doing? That's not what you're supposed to do. Say, hey, maybe we should pass a law that lets you do that, which as far as I know would be the first city in the nation that would have passed that kind of a law. And you were integrally involved in the process of pushing back on that. So I want to give you the floor to talk to us about what that process looked like, what you were able to accomplish, and what you see coming.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody, or I think morning if you're joining from the West Coast. So I think too, just for context as well, for the group, this was broken by the Washington Post. We can't claim credit that we even knew that this was happening. That's how like subversive and how just like basically a thumb in the nose of the law our officers were operating at the time. And we're not even sure exactly for how long. It is still very unclear. But that basically a private nonprofit company who is shielded then from all FOIA, public records requests, or any information gathering that groups could have that would allow for transparency and accountability was putting up cameras around the city at their own cost or asking people to opt into their system, whereby this private company could take over their camera at any given time. And if available to have real-time facial recognition tracking, basically follow you wherever you are going. And then send an alert to an app on an officer's phone that you were just spotted on this camera. Go. This is also an interesting use of Facebook for sort of like community policing, that they will also just post pictures of people who this person thinks is doing the wrong. And, that includes, for wherever you are from, it includes grilling on the street. Technically, that maybe makes you a vendor, maybe you need a permit, but maybe you're not hurting anybody. So why are we sending cops to go yell at barbecue folks who are out barbecuing, or also shot girls? very common here in New Orleans. It is not a prohibited practice, but also they were being targeted by this. And the language from the company was that, we're focusing on violent felons, people with warrants, and that just wasn't the case. So this all bubbles up. It's broken by the Washington Post. NOPD suspends the practice, and rather than saying like, oops, we broke the law. And unfortunately, this was also a law with no teeth. So there weren't going to be repercussions for them anyway. They could have just said, our bad, we won't do it anymore. They doubled down and said, here's a policy and here's an ordinance that's actually going to legalize every illegal thing we just did. So that was initially presented, and there was immediate, like, I don't know, from the South gasping and clutching of pearls, but also like actual, like legitimate, very real community outrage. Like, how dare you break the law and then change the law to validate it? And so, honestly, what we had to do and where this all started from was I had to learn what this meant and what it was, quite honestly. And so, with folks that are very well versed in surveillance and in technology, basically help folks understand how this is different, because we do have a facial recognition ordinance in the city already. We do have a real-time crime center. We do have the ability for officers to look at pictures and say, yep, that's who that is. There's the warrant. Let's go get them. But real-time live facial recognition technology is that point that is the first in the nation. This was basically going to make us extremely different from everywhere else. And the ordinance went even further. It would have allowed, and interestingly, the office, our NOPD, our police department, could have contracted with the same company that helped them break the law to get access to the cameras, or they could pay to set up their own cameras. It was very broadly written in the ordinance. And then they would basically be allowed to use characteristic tracking, your cell phone data, cell site tracking services, or facial recognition technology. And the first thing that we had to help people understand is what is different about live or real-time facial recognition, and how it allows you to track people, how it allows you to build patterns, how every single person that walks by this camera's face is being scanned. And the law would have let that camera scan sit in a database for 30 days at least, or for the life of a case if there was a criminal investigation or any kind of follow-up in the court system. So you can imagine that this turned into two camps. Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, who cares? And like, oh my gosh, what an invasion of my privacy. But interestingly too, that was actually like the meetings with council people were really telling in they didn't know exactly what this technology was. And so it was a huge education piece around what does live facial recognition mean? How does it operate? And then basically like saying it over and over and over again. And it included, interestingly, that our police department was very invested in passing this ordinance, so therefore very invested in defending it. So they went on radio shows to talk about it with our executive director, Alana Odoms. They wanted us in forums and town halls organized by our Office of Independent Police Monitor, which I got to sit on with Edith and with NOPD and with the author of the ordinance. So they were doing everything they could to convince people that this was okay. And so it actually kind of made it really easy for us to keep pointing out over and over and over again how it is not okay, how the Supreme Court has said this is not okay, how dragnet surveillance is not okay. And then ultimately speaking to, it was, again, and Edith will speak much more to this around like what it means to actually build community opposition and support to this. But it was the community over and over and over again saying, this is really racist. This is not okay. This is really racist. This is not okay. And it was a drum beat that we just had to continuously hit until thankfully, I think we saw that it was actually like not going to work. They were not going to get the support they needed. And in a perfect storm, the author of the bill was also running for mayor. So you can imagine how there is some politics at play here that really was, let's not bring this to a vote even, because the blowback on a bigger campaign was going to be a problem. So I think that was sort of where we were. But honestly, it really fundamentally, especially with technology, folks are going to think it's okay, or they're going to think it's like something else, right? If I can use ChatGPT, what is this? And that's a really easy correlation or jump for a lot of people to make, to think, oh, it can't be that bad. And so it was just really incumbent on us to basically point out what a horror it was and I think I sent materials and we're happy to share it, but like the branding here from our offices and the comms folks that knew to say calling this big brother in the big easy does have a horror connotation, dystopian tone that we don't want here. We are the big easy. It's supposed to be laissez le bon temps rouler, except it's all going to be caught on camera and it's going to be stored somewhere and it's everybody all the time, everywhere.
I like that. Big Brother and the Big Easy. So a little alliteration, right? And a catchy tagline while you're telling everybody it's horrible is not a bad thing. And I also heard like having to pull in the people that can actually explain technologically, why is this different? Why is this bad? The questions that are important to answer when people are like, it's cool, I'm not doing anything, right? Which is something you hear frequently. All right. So, I mean, I think, and that is part of it, right? How do you get over that hurdle of talking to people about what is this thing and why is it so bad? And so I know New Orleans, like I said, they're always doing the most. And like they've even had Palantir setting up like all kinds of ways of drawing people into gangs and conspiracies and things. And their city council didn't even know that was happening, right? It's not even like they bought it and were like, hey, use this. They didn't even know they had it, right? At least they knew face recognition was a thing. No idea. And so there's just so many things that happen in New Orleans. And I imagine like each one provides like a unique opportunity, but also like that education barrier of trying to bring people on board. So I would love if you could talk to us a little bit about what Eyes on Surveillance does in New Orleans and how you handle some of those like, bridge those technological gaps for folks who are like aware of what they're doing and what they want from their city, but can get intimidated by the tech.
Sure, yes, thank you so much. Unfortunately, this this type of scenario of New Orleans being treated as disposable or as guinea pigs is not new. And there is a pattern that as EOS we've seen as well. EOS actually started as a coalition of organizations that came together in 2020 to pass a surveillance ban that included facial recognition. And it was really a big victory for community organizing where, we had reproductive justice organizations, we had immigrant rights organizations, we had sex worker groups that all came together really with the understanding that surveillance is never going to equal safety. And if anything, it harms, and it's rooted in racism. And unfortunately, that ordinance was amended, I want to say a year later, by some of the same political, I want to say Jason Williams, who is a DA now, who supported the first ordinance, was a key player in amending it and then opening up the use of facial recognition in the city. And so that's kind of like the similar work that we had to do right now for this ordinance in 2025. And it really started with the use of SLOT, which is, we call it like Google for City Council, where you can look up like any question you have about City Council, like what has City Council said about houselessness? What has it said about flooding? But it also sends out an alert with a summary of City Council meetings every time there's a meeting. And that's really how we realized that this ordinance was being considered, right? Like, it's not like City Council is going to let us know. It's not like City Council is going to like do an informational session on this huge facial recognition ordinance that will be tracking us in real time, right? And we have the understanding that community, these spaces are not spaces for community. And we are the ones, and I say that as, someone who, I'm not like a tech expert. I'm an immigrant myself, a queer person who works in immigrant rights a lot. And so we are the ones who are going to be paying for this technology with our taxes, and we're the ones who are going to be in the front lines, who are going to be harmed by this technology. So we have to bring community into these spaces that are not made for us. And it's not easy work, but it's a lot of community building. It means like talking to different community organizations that are very grassroots. It means going to the community neighborhood meetings. It means being on the forums that Sarah described. And it means really breaking down what the surveillance means, what facial recognition means, because even the police itself who were introducing this ordinance were very vague about what it does. Even in the forums, right, there was a community member that asked, is this going to build a database of our information? And David Barnes, who was one of the proponents of the ordinance from the local police, refused to really say yes or no. And so I had to jump in and be like, yes, it will build a database of all our information. It will be tracking and recording our information in real time and trying to match our correct characteristics. So really just putting it into simple terms and talking about how it will affect us is really important. Talking to different groups, we brought Vote In, who works with formerly incarcerated folks, Unión Mirante, DSA, and being able to have the different voices of people who are going to be harmed by this technology was really key.
All right, so I will say I'm never surprised when people, from bilingual homes are always the translators, right? Because it's something that we grew up accustomed to doing. And it sounds like there was a lot of was sort of translating and building capacity, but also bringing people in and giving them the tools to sort of go do what needs to be done and say what needs to be said. And so I think that's actually a great segue to Celinda, who I guess you're part of the ShotSpotter Coalition and would love to know a little bit about sort of how you all are pushing back on that. You're in Albuquerque, where the police just don't quit policing, and they never do it well. So, there's just anybody who doesn't know about the Albuquerque Police Department, just do a Google search, and I imagine you're going to find so much that you could still be here next week, like looking up the various issues. And I know you do that. You're doing that sort of tech work in the context of larger mutual aid and abolition work. And so I would love for you to talk to us about, a bit about sort of the work with the National Coalition and how that plays out locally, but also how that feeds into the larger work you're doing and how you do that integration.
Yes, thank you so much. And I just big ups to Vote. Those are my comrades. Also, thank you, Sarah and Edith, for lifting up all of the work in Louisiana. We also organize in Louisiana and Alabama. So near and dear to my heart, that is my second home is Nolia. So just so much connection in this panel right now. And just a quick comment about, Louisiana, like, I think it's important for us to recognize like the way surveillance technology manifests, right? Like Louisiana has double the national average prison population. Louisiana and Alabama have led in the ways that the carceral state continues to manifest itself, right? And keep perfecting slavery, because that's what this is. And I also want to lift up as the connection to immigrant justice right now, especially, is that Camp J in Angola prison, the work camp, historically, in a class action lawsuit that got filed in 2023 and that is ongoing. So we won in July of 2024. The prisoners won a temporary restraining order where they don't have to pick cotton this summer. And so what they did is they turned Camp J into an immigrant detention concentration camp. So now immigrant detainees are now picking the cotton on this plantation. And so as we think about the ways that the carceral state continues to manifest and protect it, like reinvent itself over and over again and perfect itself, like these are all the manifestations of that. So they're like, these things are not separate and apart, but they are all together part of the greater structure that we're talking about. And so I think it's really important. Like the thing that I would like for us to start with is this idea that like people need to understand that slavery still exists in this country. There was a loophole left in the 13th Amendment that said if you were convicted of a crime that you can still be enslaved or the conditions of enslaved person. And so that's what we are watching in real time when we look at the ways that surveillance technology plays into the carceral state. So there's this concept. It's called pan. I'm going to say it wrong. It's panopticon.
The panopticon. Yeah.
Panopticon, right? And so the panopticon type of institutional building, right? That's what we see now in modern day prisons. But it was, the history of it, it was developed in the 18th century, but basically allows for the constant surveillance of inmates or individuals, right? It features a central observation tower centered by cells with the design ensuring that inmates can see their surroundings, but are unable to know if they are being watched. It leads to this concept of self-regulation that's what they're trying to promote. And when we look at and think about the way they pitch surveillance technology, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about, right, what somebody just said, a comment a moment ago. If you're not doing nothing wrong, then what do you have to worry about? Right? That's what that connection is to. And so when we think about the ways this is a type of social control, right? So this idea that, if people are being watched, they're going to self-regulate. Well, not always built and designed as a concept that's just in prison architecture. It's also becoming an architecture of our neighborhoods. And so that is how it connects to the way surveillance technology works. And all of this technology, I just want to lift up Free Palestine, because this technology was perfected and tested on Palestinians first. So whether it's facial recognition, flock, all of the things that are being used right now, crime centers, cop cities, all of these things were tested first in Gaza on Palestinians. And the IDF was training and continues to train both our US military and our US policing agencies. And we're watching the translation of that kind of control that was used against Palestinians in Gaza into our neighborhoods here in the United States using this very same technology. And so we have to have that broad lens to be able to understand the full dynamics of the way that this network is playing out. And so that's what they're trying to influence upon us. And it's not new. People of color and the poor enslaved people have always been under surveillance. So we look back at the badges and incidents of slavery. So for all the lawyers who are present with us today, this technology that we're talking about surveillance technology, is a badge and incident of slavery. And the advancements of it need to be labeled as such. And those are the legal arguments that we need to be bringing forward about this technology. And so we think about lantern laws during chattel slavery, right? If somebody was out after dark who was an enslaved person, they had to carry a lantern around with them to signify that they were an enslaved person. They would have to wear badges if they were out off their plantation, and it said the word slave on it with the year and what their occupation was, or their purpose for being off the plantation. And so these badges continue to be present all around us in our society. And we need to be thinking about the way surveillance technology is just an evolution of those very structures, because that's what they are. These are just modern structures of state-sanctioned surveillance and violence against people of color and the poor. And so as it relates to New Mexico, I want to lift into the space also the name Javon Givon. Javon was lynched in Albuquerque, and we just found out this week that it happened. Our Albuquerque Police Department buried it. And they buried it, and they hid it from the family, and we just found out about it. And so all of these things are together manifestations of a continuation of these very same structures that are continuing to be used against us. In Albuquerque right now, in New Mexico, I'm going to speak wholly, but Albuquerque, we have a crime center. In New Mexico, we have a Fleet Sea site For folks that don't know what FLEETC is, it's based in Artesia, New Mexico. This is the largest ICE training facility in the United States, and it's here in New Mexico. And it's here in the Permian Basin of New Mexico, where it is an environmental sacrifice zone. And so this is a firm ground for them to be able to get away with things like making a giant ICE training camp. And the ICE training camp is actually at an old college campus that got turned into this facility. In the FLEETC, and the reason that this is important, inside of FLEETC is the largest data collection happening through ICE right now, and it's here in New Mexico. And that's the FLEETC site that is tracking Antifas and all this rhetoric that's out right now. Those profiles are being fed into the FLEETC centers. And there's only 3 in the United States, and one of them is here in New Mexico. We also have a fusion center here in New Mexico. It's part of Homeland Security. The fusion center is in Santa Fe. We have 2 cop cities in New Mexico. Well, I was in Atlanta with comrades fighting against Atlanta Cop City. They built 2 in my state. Well, I was gone, and so these are the hubs of where all of this surveillance technology is fed into. And so we have Flock, we have ShotSpotter, we have facial recognition technology. We have, think about the Ring cameras. Ring cameras were first shopped by police on to the general public, and they had in the clause says that live stream can go to the crime centers. And there was a lawsuit that had a stay, but that's been since overturned in this current administration. So if you have a Ring camera, that's being fed directly into crime centers right now. And then we have drone technology and drone surveillance happening right now. Albuquerque Police Department they have just secured the largest fleet of drones of any local police department in the entire country. And they brag about the hives that they have of drones that they have on top of buildings. And so all of this plays into this idea of predictive policing, which is not a real concept. And every time we hear the term predictive policing, we need to be broadly pushing back against it. Because what it is, it's that concept of surveillance and being watched and people being able to be regulated. And so in my city, they use the fleets of drones to disturb unhoused people at night, to wake them in their tents and make them move. The drones float over the encampments of unhoused people in the middle of the night and yells demands at them to gather their things and start walking. Think about what that means. And so the other thing, and the hives are located on top of our public libraries. That's where they installed them. So
Okay, you're hurting my heart with the library, Celinda, but I'm going to ask you to wrap soon so we can move to Devon.
Yes.
But I'm all in, and not the libraries, not cool with the libraries.
Yes. And so the last part that I just want to know is in the crime center, so our governor already deployed the National Guard onto the ground into our communities. And they actually sit and monitor in the crime centers. They can zoom in to somebody who's standing on the street to see what they're lighting, if it's a cigarette or anything else, to send a cop to that person under this guise of predictive policing. In my city, in a 2-mile radius along Central Avenue in our international district, or it's known as the war zone in my community, in the southeast of Albuquerque, it's a 2-mile area. They have already disappeared 900 people into the county jail, criminalizing them through using this surveillance technology. So there are real implications about the ways that this technology is being weaponized against our communities. And I think the last thing we know is that this technology is not in affluent neighborhoods. They wouldn't tolerate it. They would not tolerate it. So think about that as a comparison. So I think we have real Fourth Amendment arguments that can be raised against this surveillance technology because it's targeting specific groups and violating their privacy rights. And I think all the lawyers in the room, I'm just advocating and calling into the world that we need to be pushing back and broadly filing litigation on constitutional amendments against this technology.
I mean, we're here for it. Like literally the Fourth Amendment Center is here for it. That's what we do. So we will make sure we also put our email in the chat in case you do have some of these questions and want to talk about litigating them. You can reach out to us. And that being said, and how do you move on from there? No pressure, Devin, but like you actually have been doing a huge amount of work in Philadelphia to pull together a broad coalition to look at not even just policing technology, but all the technology that is making people's lives hard, right? Whether it's like access to housing, access to healthcare, funneling you into the criminal legal system and all of that. And by the way, just to add to your creepy, because I think now everybody has a tin hat on, Celinda, they're now feeding the Ring cameras directly into Axon's real-time crime centers to then integrate it into their evidence management system. So it is super integrated. But Darren, can you talk to us about the work you've been doing on the ground and how you have built this coalition that is now engaging with the city on the kind of tech that is making their lives difficult?
Thank you. So I think this story starts in 2017. I'm going to try to keep it brief, but during that time in Philadelphia, there was a major effort from multiple communities and even some of the city to like reduce the prison population in Philly. They stopped the jail from being built. And, going into that from that perspective, in 2020, when George Floyd kicked off, when the George Floyd uprisings came, we saw, of course, massive movement in Philadelphia more broadly around just like abolitionist principles and all of these things. And the result of that was that it created the political conditions where city council and our elected officials had to make a choice of like, are we going to lean into this or are we going to resist? And the way they chose to resist the narratives of decarceration and abolition was to accuse the communities that are raising them as being like white. Philadelphia is a very Black city. It's majority Black. And so our politicians accused these demands of being coming from white communities specifically. And I tell this story because it sets up perfectly for where we are now, where now our politicians are blaming the decarceration on increased rates of violence and harm that are happening and using that blame to roll back a lot of the policies we've been fighting for. But they have to do this little dance where they also don't try to be too carceral or increase the police department's numbers too much, right? And that's where technology actually fits in because they can cheaply expand the police's infrastructure through surveillance and other technologies, while also saying that they are not going to increase the number of officers, et cetera, et cetera. And so for the work of People's Tech, who believes that when corporations and governments are the ones that are controlling technology, it's being used to exploit communities. It's being used to criminalize communities and surveil communities. So when we jump into that conversation, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, like, look at all of the ways that technology is being used against people who are in need. Philadelphia is one of the poorest large cities in the country. And, a lot of the political conversations in Philly are about how do we stop being the poorest large city in the country? And a lot of our politicians are saying, well, we have to make our streets safer. We have to get this crime under control, which means we jail our kids. We jail our kids. We jail their parents. We also, through in divesting from our communities and the social safety nets, so that's schools, that's blighted properties or blighted buildings in different neighborhoods. Um, we, yeah, so we do all of those things. And we invest in technology, we invest in the police, we invest in making sure that if something happens, we can bring that person to justice, etc. And so, what that looks like for Philly is massive investments in things like body worn cameras, automated ticketing systems, and other technologies that the police really love to use. And that money is actually coming away from or not being invested into the communities, into our schools, and things like that. So we started with a conversation with local organizations who have been dealing with like invest divest strategies through the budget to understand what tech issues are they seeing, right? We've talked to people about needing their community members being like, we need a better 311 system. We need internet for our students, and and things like that. And then we looked at what they're actually doing, right? And so in the last budget cycle, we saw that the city was investing in drones for the school district for games and things like that. Also, in automated ticketing systems, we saw a huge ramp up in automated ticketing systems, both directly in neighborhoods, but then also in other public areas in the city. And we brought that into conversation with the organizations that we've been organizing with, and especially with their members, to understand what it is that they felt and how they felt about these different technologies existing while also having limited access to technology themselves. Um, and that gave us the grounds to bring together the Philly Tech Justice Collective, where we are developing strategies for driving community conversations, for that will lead to us being able to really attack the narrative that our local officials are using around technology, that it is a neutral force of good, right, of progress, that communities stand to benefit from, and shine a light on the ways in which, like, many poor communities in Philly, they are surrounded by technology, but they don't have access to it outside of maybe a cell phone, maybe Wi-Fi, right? Like, for instance, the police department having the ability to look into people's homes with surveillance cameras, or also them circumventing city council's like authority by going to local foundations to have them purchase them like drones that they can use to surveil people's neighborhoods. And so really it's been about taking a step back and kind of going to the like core tenets of what it means to organize, which is identifying, one, what is this shared vision for what we want technology to be? And the vision that we walked away from these conversations with was that at its core, technology is something that is born out of like the human collective knowledge, right? And the benefit that it can bring into our society is that it can make our society more accessible for everyone. It can also connect us to one another over distance. And it can also help us to identify need and distribute resources sustainably instead of like being used as a tool to put people in jail. And from there we are building out, like, as I said, a broader strategy for just doing canvassing and having discussions with people to help us, one, return to the next budget cycle with a larger amount of the community behind us, because for a lot of the folks who are existing in many of our poorest neighborhoods, they are also feeling the impact of not having the resources that are necessary in order for them to feel safe. And so they're faced with an impossible decision or choice. It's like, you know, we can say we don't want police, but if we offer nothing else, if we offer no other mechanism for people to feel safe, then they feel like they're not going to have anything and we're actually taking something away. And so, in order for us to get past that dynamic, we actually, yeah, we had to go back to our basics and just build that vision and build the broader movement to have a larger discussion because of how the narrative around decarceration and abolition has been stolen by the media and weaponized against our communities.
All right. So I told you I was pretty excited about putting this group of people together. And like they delivered. That was fire. There's like so much fire. I think we've drawn every single fire department across the country. But we're not trying to put that fire out. We're actually trying to light it in you. And so I think if I'm not correct, we have until 3:05. And so I mean, there was so much in what you all just talked about, right? Like so many kinds of tech, so many types of efforts. I would love to go around on like, if I am just sitting here listening to you all on this, what is the one or two things that I can take away that says, okay, so like if I go back to my community, I can, I can start with this one thing or these two things, right? Because sometimes it can feel really massive. It is really massive, right? The panopticon is real. There's the cameras and the drones and the license plate readers and then all the other things, right? The body cameras. You just listed so many things, and now my head hurts because there's real time face recognition, and like now I want to just curl up under the blankets over my head, maybe with a carton of ice cream, right? Which does not get us anywhere. It feels very cozy, but it doesn't get us anywhere. So I would love maybe, and I don't know, we can go the same order or whoever wants to pop in, but just some thoughts about like what are some things, practical things that people can do, um, understanding that like one person or one effort is not going to take down the whole system, right? We're not going to like wave our wand, but that will actually contribute to the larger effort of bringing some of this tech under control, whether it's sidelining it, repurposing it, whatever the thing is. I would love some sort of specific thoughts on what someone can take away from this that they might do, in their communities. Sarah, do you want to start or do we want to go a different order? I leave it up to you guys.
Devin, thank you so much for all of your offerings. And you said something that would really just made me remember a moment. And it goes to this point, right? When we think about the different ways and the ways that we want to have this conversation, I always point people back to March of 2020. And when we think about March of 2020, when we're entering a global pandemic, and people in the United States capitalist empire are told, the people in this country were told, go home and don't worry about your bills. Don't worry about paying your rent or your utilities right now. Just go home and be with your family. When we took the pressure of capitalism off of oppressed people's necks, there was virtually no violence. I can tell you in my own city, there wasn't a single homicide in March of 2020. Domestic violence rates are at the lowest that they have ever been historically, and it's been unmatched ever since. Because people, that pressure was off of them and they got to just be in joy with their families. And not that the climate was not scary or we weren't facing unprecedented times, but people got to be together in a way that they hadn't been before, and without having to worry about paying a bill. And so what we know, what actually where real safety comes from is community and connection. It comes from our basic necessities being met. And so when we can meet those basic necessities, violence dissipates. So we always want to remember that this whole concept of fear and this of the rhetoric of the politics of fear and anger is actually a tool. It's a weapon that's used to justify the carceral state and the surveillance state. And so we always want to be pushing back against that. And so we do that by talking about the things that actually make that go away. Violence is a symptom of people in the struggle. Tupac talked about it the best, I think. If my stomach is hungry, you're not safe. right? And so when you starve people, people get desperate and they fight for survival. And so by meeting people's needs and making sure people have access to the very bare necessities, even shelter, food, education, transportation, you will make violence dissipate. And this is why the key thing, and to your point, Jumana, that you were saying, like, what are principled things that we could be doing right now is we need to be deeply invested again, like we were in 2020, into the defund movement. We need to be defunding surveillance technology and investing in our community and the resources that it needs to survive. That's the key, and that's how we are safe. That's what makes us safe. And so the best thing that we can do right now, the second best thing we can do aside from that, is keeping this surveillance technology out of our communities in the first place. So every single location where your city council or your mayor or your police department is proposing new flocks, new drones, new shot spotters, new any of these technologies, we need to be actively pushing back and defunding. And cities like Chicago and Portland have already led the way. It is possible to get this stuff out of our police departments. And we know that crime did not go up when these things disappeared from our communities. So they've already laid the foundation for us to have a blueprint that other cities can use and pinpoint to.
Thank you, Celinda. Who else wants to jump in? Edith, I think I saw your, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and thank you for that, Celinda. And also thinking of like when we ask our neighbors, like, what does safety, community safety look like for you? They're not going to say drones. They're not going to say cameras. And so like we inherently know this. Like if we resource our communities, we're going to have safe communities. But we have been fed the lie of, surveillance and policing is safety. And we really, I think one of the major work tasks that I feel like we have to do is that narrative change with political education, of understanding the history of surveillance and how it's used, right? Like, what is Palantir? Who's behind Palantir? How does that affect us? Palestine, and also Latin America and the whole world, right? How the CIA was spying on us and all these movements for justice around the world. And it can start with like you literally just doing some research, and even in your same community, like what's going on with Flock in your community, what's going on with this and that and the cameras. But also like joining organizations that are talking about this and not only fighting against this, but y'all kept mentioning like building, right? Like what are we gonna do to make our community safe, other than fight against these systems that are harming us? Like what do we build, right? And it can start with conversations with your family. I've certainly had many, and it can be difficult, I know, but it's definitely a way that we can start. And then just taking it out and like building that community and building that mutual aid and everything that we need to really build the future that we want. But as I said, like the spaces where people make decisions, they're usually not for us. And so like trying to work to make it for us and trying to put that information out there, what's going on, is really important as well.
Thank you, Edith. Sarah, everyone?
To just echo off of that, I think too, it's that I think sometimes technology gets this pass or this expectation that it's going to fix a problem. And I think we all have to start pushing back and really critically questioning, like, what are you trying to fix and how is this technology going to fix it without significant and serious guardrails? Because while I think like technology has a place, no one is ever going to say, I'll never use my cell phone again, right? But we are starting to get to a place where we're very careful or cognizant of like when we're using our cell phones, how we're using our cell phones, what does it mean to have this technology with us, on us all the time? I think that same thing also has to be outward facing on our law enforcement partners to say, if you're coming with this ask, why? What's the value add? And how are we going to make sure that it is not misused? And then I think Devin raised this other point, the point around, well, don't give them the pass if they will not publicly fund technology to go get it from a private company or corporation. That's what we've seen here in New Orleans, that a nonprofit, you know, shielded from all of the public facing accountability that law enforcement has, is in fact more dangerous. Farming out our surveillance, our technology, our law enforcement to private companies scares me. It should scare everybody. And that needs a level of scrutiny. And it has to be part of public conversations that these for-profit companies stand to make billions off of, we know, over-policed Black and brown communities. And that is unacceptable. And I think it was like to Celinda's point, because when we make those communities less safe, we are all less safe. Like that's where the investment and the time and the people has to go.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, many times actually the companies themselves will offer to help the law enforcement department write the grants so they can buy their tools so they can make their billions. It's a fairly regular practice. I will say we do have one question in the chat, and Devin, I think you had just come off mute, so maybe we'll take this as well as whatever you had in mind. But the question is, how do we make some of these technical and complicated issues accessible for communities who don't, have technical computer science, whatever kind of degree background that it seems like you need to comprehend them? So I don't know if you can work that into what you're about to say, or if we'll just open that after you say what you're about to say. No
Yeah, I
pressure.
mean, I've been like toying with this idea of like giving people instructions, like when you see technology in your community, like what is it doing, right? Is it watching you? Is it trying to make money off of you, or is it trying to like send you to jail? Right? Like, because it's one of those three things normally, or like, is it trying to keep you safe, which would be like a street light, right? um, and so I guess that's how I would answer that question, because I actually don't think you need to have a degree in tech to be able to understand any of this. I don't. And really, I come at this understanding of technology through being an abolitionist. Like that's just how it is for me. The other thing I will say is like for a lot of folks who are curious about what their city has and what it doesn't have, look in the budget. Those documents are public information. Google the companies. You literally Google the company's name and scandal and see what comes up, because you will find a lot, right? That's how we ran a lot of our budget research. And it helped us understand like the different implications for like not just the city's purchasing of a specific technology, but its relationship to private industry and the types of functions it's trying to offload onto the private sector that it probably won't be able to get back. And the last thing I will say is that part of the conversation around technology and police use of technology is, yes, like they are vastly expanding their power, but then also the value in the technology, the value that the technology's use by the government brings back to the company, because yes, they are selling that software or hardware to the company, but they're also getting access to public data. And so for folks that have been following Doge and all of the havoc that it's wreaked on the federal government, that is a perfect example of how companies actually want to get access to publicly available data so that they can then use that to enhance their AI, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and the very last thing I want to say is that we are watching in real time the federal government go and try to take over different cities for political purposes. And so the question that I've been asking people is like, yeah, sure, I guess your local police department being able to look into your window might be fine, right? But do you want ICE? Do you want the National Guard? Like, do you want these other federal law enforcement agencies who have been taking over our communities with a political aim in mind? Do you want them to have access to those resources? Because that's where we could be going very quickly. And if you don't, then there's a choice that needs to be made right now about what our cities and our tax dollars are invested in going forward. So, yeah.
All right, so this has been amazing. I'm going to give you guys each like 45 seconds for a quick wrap so I can have like my own 45. Sarah, I'm going to go through like how we started. So Sarah,
Yeah,
last round.
thank you so much. I think too, specific to this audience for criminal defense lawyers, the other thing that you really need to be careful of and question is like, is law enforcement and the DA's office being transparent about these uses of technology and being very careful that when facial recognition is used or whether or not there was body worn camera or what was being used that got your client to where they are now, where they need a criminal defense lawyer, if that's not getting tracked, if that's not in the documents, like we need to be as aware of that because that then completely undermines your ability to provide a strong, valid, and, best defense for your clients. And so you have to be critically thinking of and aware of what's the technology in your community.
Thank you. Adi?
Yeah, I think talking about how do we make this more understandable, like definitely don't use the language that the police uses for these types of technologies and just like break it down, plain language. And I think I agree with Devin about what are they using this technology for, right? When I talk to my immigrant community, it's very easy being like, ICE is literally using facial recognition on their phones to try to kidnap our community. And being like, yeah, it misidentifies people of color. You have this example of Randall Reed and like providing concrete examples of what it has done to people of color can be very, very powerful. And also like asking like why wouldn't the government have accountability, right? Like when we're talking about Project NOLA, like they are functioning basically as government, as a police. Like why isn't there accountability?
Thank you, Adi. Belinda?
Thank you. Yes. And I just, to the points that were just made in the last remarks, is thinking about the ways that the technology is also being misused by the federal government under fascism right now. So we know that license plate readers are already being used to track people who are seeking reproductive health care, or seeking abortion care, trans medical care. And so we know that they're already using license plate readers to track folks that are seeking care. We also know that ICE is getting access even in so-called sanctuary cities through the crime centers. So although police in sanctuary cities are not collaborating on the ground, they're logging in and giving access to ICE agents who are using that data to track our most vulnerable immigrant community members that are being targeted. And so I think the most important thing too, and to the points that have already been made, is just calling things what they are. This is not complicated. Cops came from slave catchers and they still function as the same purpose. We still have plantations. Slavery still exists. We are running concentration camps. Like, we need to call things what they are because people can reconcile with that. And so I think just making, like, we have to take out the propaganda machine away from things so that people can clearly see, oh, actually, yes. And once people wake up to calling things what they are, I've had community members tell me now, I can't look at a cop and not see a slave catcher anymore when I watch them in my communities. So I'm just like, yeah, that's what they're doing. They're collecting bodies and taking them back to a plantation where they're going to have forced labor. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what this is. And so when we take away the propaganda machine that says serve and protect and all that shenanigans, people can clearly see what it is, and then they're prepared to fight back.
Phenomenal. Devin?
I would have maybe saved my last comment for this one if I had thought of if I had thought about it. But I think the final word for me is really about community control, not just of technology, but of like our government. Like, I guess democracy would be nice. And folks needing to get back to the bread and butter, like organizing and mutual aid and support, especially in the face of authoritarianism that we're dealing with right now, and the broad need for solidarity from folks from community, the legal system, to policy experts that live in DC. There is a need for us to kind of break down the silos and to be in formation with one another if we are ever going to see the other side of whatever this moment is right now.
Amazing. So we all need to get information. Thank you so much. If any of you ever see me do a panel for SCJN before, I always pull together the people that I want to hear from. And I got to say, these folks did not disappoint. Thank you so much, those of you who attended and all of you who actually spoke to us.